Ballet's history begins in a single political act. In 1533, France and Italy were joined in an official alliance through the marriage of 14-year-old Florentine Catherine de Medici and Henry II, the future King of France. Welcome to part one of our Dance and Politics series. But first, let's talk a little bit about Catherine's father, Lorenzo de Medici, heir to the de Medici dynasty, a powerful Florentine family who started out as bankers in the 1300s. Under Lorenzo, patronage of the arts profoundly shaped the Renaissance, transforming Florence into the cultural epicenter of the era. His support for artists, writers, and thinkers created an environment that fostered unprecedented creativity and innovation. He maintained a court of renowned artists, including Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Botticelli, providing them with resources and commissions, facilitating the creation of some of the most celebrated art in human history and defining the aesthetics and ideals of the Renaissance. This support not only advanced the careers of individual artists, but also elevated the status of art itself, shaping the cultural transformation that defined the era. And making an enormous contribution to the thread of humanist thought, he also funded the development of literature, music, and philosophy, expanding the Medici Library and supporting scholars. Catherine, his daughter, would have been accustomed to Italian court performances, which, according to many accounts, included jugglers, choreographed cavalry, fireworks, dancers, live animals, and theatrical divertissement. Whereas in France, much of the entertainment at the time consisted of war games such as tournaments and jousting, and even if the French did also have masquerades, it wouldn't have been on the level of beauty and spectacle that she was used to. And when the French king, her husband, died in 1559, she was just entering her 40s, and she became the ruling force in the court. It was through her taste and influence that art, spectacle, and politics merged in France. In 1570, Catherine de Medici's son, Charles IX, established the Académie de Poésie et de Musique during a period of intense turmoil in France. In this time, it is well known that Catherine herself played a controversial role in the violence of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and the nation was bitterly divided by religious conflict. Amid this unrest, many nobles and intellectuals believed that theater and the arts could serve as a political tool, a way to soothe tensions and promote unity amongst warring factions. The Academy was founded in this spirit. Its creators believed that the arts had the power to elevate the human soul, lifting it above the base, earthly passions. And in an era when the church was increasingly compromised by this strife between different sects of Christianity, and in an era when the church was increasingly compromised by strife and violence, the arts were seen as a kind of spiritual refuge, a neutral, secular path to divine connection and understanding, where beauty and harmony could offer what religion only haltingly could, a direct line to God. Out of the Academy came the 6-hour production Ballet Comique de la Reine, the first of a genre of ballets called ballet de corps, with the ballet's emphasis on geometry and exactitude as opposed to more improvised acts. It was the earliest foundation of what would later become codified as the art form we know today. Jumping ahead to King Louis XIV, born about a half a century after Catherine de Medici's death, we see the continuation of dance as a political instrument. Louis XIV famously compelled the nobility of France to join him at Versailles and his other palaces, and refusing this invitation came at a cost. By drawing the nobles away from their own spheres of influence, whether on their estates or in Paris, he centralized power under his control. He also established a royal army loyal to the crown rather than to regional lords, and life at Versailles was a continuous performance. Regular theatrical productions were staged, and nobles were often required to take part. Daily court life was strictly choreographed, with one's rank determining where you could stand, even some say how you entered or exited a room, and it would sometimes even dictate what kind of furniture you were allowed to sit on. Given this legacy, it's no surprise that the Paris Opera Ballet today maintains a more elaborate ranking system than most ballet companies throughout the world. This tradition had roots in Louis XIV's lineage. His father had already been using ballet not as a covert spiritual or psychological tool to elevate the monarchy's image as earlier rulers had done, but as an overt display of royal propaganda. Louis XIII staged ballets to present himself in divine, kingly form, stripped of the lofty philosophical or religious aspirations of his predecessors. It was unabashed personal branding, pure and powerful. And his son, Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King, built on his father's legacy, using classical order and hierarchical choreography as tools to consolidate absolute power under the monarchy, redirecting influence away from the decentralized nobility. He also aimed to centralize and elevate all of French culture itself. In 1661, he founded the Royal Academy of Dance, alongside other institutions like the Academy of Fencing, Music, Painting, French language, and architecture. The goal was clear: to bring every facet of French culture under royal authority, and to shift the highest levels of intellectual and artistic discourse from Latin into French. And in doing so, France and its language, values, aesthetics would become a model for all of Europe. The arts, and dance in particular, were no longer just forms of entertainment. They became expressions of national identity and extensions of royal power, a sophisticated, layered form of soft power and influence. And this strategy, once established, would echo through the centuries. Prior to the Tsar, Peter the Great, Russia was a deeply religious, Muscovite society untouched by the Enlightenment and firmly rooted in the teachings of the Orthodox Church. There was no separation between church and state, and strict codes of dress governed men and women alike. I'm going to read to you a quote from Jennifer Homan's Apollo's Angels, which is a book I highly, highly, highly recommend if you haven't already read it. Western Europe went through the Reformation, the Renaissance, and the Scientific Revolution, but Russia remained cut off and bound up in the timeless liturgies of the Orthodox faith. It had no universities and no secular literary tradition. Its art and its music were almost exclusively confined to icons and sacred songs. Musical instruments were considered sinful, and dance was something that peasants did. Court ballet did not exist. Jennifer Homans. From today's point of view, knowing just how powerful and important Russian ballet was eventually to become, it's a little hard for us to imagine how different things were, and that ballet at the time was so predominant in France and really unheard of in Russia. That is, until Peter the Great. Let's take a look. Everything changed with the rise of the new czar. Peter embraced Western customs, sporting European fashions, learning foreign languages, and studying the arts of the West, including fencing and dancing. His reforms were so sweeping that he nearly rendered elite Russian society unrecognizable within his own lifetime. He built the city of St. Petersburg in the style of French architecture and modeled his palace on Versailles. He encouraged the nobility to speak French and even outlawed the wearing of beards, which were long considered a religious symbol of a man's closeness to God. Inspired by Louis XIV's obsession with ranks and hierarchy, Peter soon brought in French and Italian ballet masters to train the children of the royal court. Ballet was seen as a multi-purpose tool, a display, a regal comportment, a way of casting mortal rulers in the image of the gods through refined posture and storytelling in motion. The narratives performed on stage reflected how monarchs viewed themselves and how they expected others to see them, or suggested that others see them. Ballet was also tied closely to military training, particularly fencing. In fact, the beginnings of what would become the Imperial Theater, the Kirov, and eventually the Mariinsky did not start in a theater at all, but in a military school, the Imperial Cadet Corps. A French ballet master was brought in to train the young cadets, and when Empress Anna witnessed the effectiveness of his work, she founded a dedicated school of dance. And the first students were all children of the royal servants. In Russia, as in France, ballet was used to both mold bodies and societies. It shaped military discipline, noble etiquette, and national identity, both internally and on the world's stage. And you will see this same pattern repeat in countries like the United States, Great Britain, Cuba, Turkey, Iran, and beyond. We see the role of the dancer rise and fall across time and geography. Dancers often occupy a unique space in the social hierarchy, at once elevated and marginalized. Cloaked in the elegance and artifice of royalty, they may and often do come from backgrounds more akin to orphans or peasants. They dwell in a shadowy in-between place, always both more and less than they appear. Dance and national identity. The production of souls is more important than the production of tanks. I raise my glass to you, writers, the engineers of the human soul. Stalin, in 1932, toasting the artists at the home of Maxim Gorky. After the 1917 Russian Revolution, ballet underwent profound transformation, emerging in the early 20th century as both an artistic and political force deeply intertwined in the goals of the new Soviet state. One of the Bolsheviks' first major moves was to nationalize the imperial theaters, opening their doors to working-class audiences. What had once been an exclusive art form of the aristocracy was reimagined as a tool for mass education and ideological enlightenment. Ballet was now viewed as a means of politically educating and inspiring the people. The state developed an extensive system to make ballet accessible, offering free or discounted tickets, providing explanatory materials, and staging performances at workers' clubs and factories. The vast network of ballet schools and companies that still exists in Russia today owes much to this Soviet infrastructure. It was the state that institutionalized mass dance education, turning ballet into a pillar of national pride, and this is a legacy that still endures. During Stalin's regime, the doctrine of socialist realism became the dominant artistic standard. Ballets were expected to uplift and mobilize the people in the struggle for socialism, showcasing idealized Soviet citizens through stylized movement and storytelling. Works like The Red Poppy in 1927 epitomize this approach, blending classical technique with revolutionary narratives. And throughout the Cold War, Soviet ballet evolved into both a cultural weapon and a symbol of national prestige. The Bolshoi Ballet, situated just steps from the Kremlin, became a global emblem of soft power and artistic excellence. Ballet functioned as the unofficial state art of the USSR, while countless artists, writers, and musicians were censored, imprisoned, or even executed for perceived or real dissidence. Ballet, silent and physically abstract, was seen as safer, more manageable, and less overtly subversive. Unlike music, which could carry coded emotion or ideological resonance, dance was viewed as easier to monitor and control. Still, its collaborative nature made it subject to direct oversight. Government officials would frequently attend rehearsals and offer notes that had to be carefully followed. And unlike poetry or visual art, which could be created and then hidden or deferred to a safer political time, ballet had to be performed in real time in order to exist. There was no standardized notation system, at least not internationally, to preserve it privately. Soviet ballet stars often enjoyed extraordinary privileges. The state provided them with cars, dachas, apartments, and status. And though many came from humble beginnings and were raised within the intensely disciplined environment of the state ballet academies, they often existed in this rarefied world apart from the ordinary citizens, isolated by fame, insulated by state patronage, and generally disinclined to challenge a system that had elevated them so completely. There were exceptions, of course, and there were dissidents within the ballet world, several of whom famously defected. Baryshnikov, Nureyev, and Makarova, the legendary triptych. There were others, but these three are the most well known. Rudolf Nureyev received much of his early training thanks to the Soviet Union's deliberate expansion of ballet beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg. Both Mikhail Baryshnikov and Natalia Makarova were trained at the Kirov Ballet in St. Petersburg, which was then Leningrad, now known as the Mariinsky, and their dramatic defections sent shockwaves through the ballet world. The men especially brought unprecedented visibility, allure, and international glamour to the art form, an influence that we are still feeling today. In this sense, the Soviet state's deep investment in ballet, even when wielded as a political and a branding tool, has ultimately benefited global dance culture far beyond its original intent. And the United States, for its part, is no exception to this global tradition of using the arts, particularly dance, to enhance its image both at home and on the world stage. After World War II, Europe was devastated. Its cities in ruins, its cultural institutions struggling to recover. Many of its great minds, artists, and intellectuals had fled during the wars and revolutions. George Balanchine and Igor Stravinsky, for instance, were stateless refugees. And in this vacuum, the US emerged as a dominant superpower, locked in ideological and cultural competition with the Soviet Union, racing to outdo them in everything from kitchen appliances to space exploration. And art, too, became a diplomatic weapon. In the post-war years, and especially after the fall of the Iron Curtain, international tours by American arts organizations were part of a broader soft power strategy, sometimes even funded in part by the CIA. Cultural exchange flowed both ways. The Bolshoi Ballet performed in New York, while New York City Ballet toured the Soviet Union. In 1958, the U.S. Congress passed legislation to establish a National Cultural Center, which would eventually become the Kennedy Center. Lincoln Center in New York followed just a year later. The construction of these grand performance spaces was no accident. It was a conscious response to the cultural might of the Soviets. In the Cold War, prestige wasn't only measured in nuclear arms or satellites, but in stages, theaters, and the symbolic power of dance. Cuba, 1960. After taking control, Fidel Castro made a firm commitment to making the arts accessible to all, allocating substantial state funding to the ballet. Famously, when he asked Alicia Alonso how much she would need to start a ballet company, she said $100,000, and he said, "I'll make it 200, and it better be a great ballet." This was part of a broader effort to integrate the arts into his revolutionary vision, and Alicia Alonso, the renowned Cuban ballerina, played a key role in this transformation. Under Castro's government, a new cultural program was established, reorganizing the company into the National Ballet of Cuba. This state funding enabled the company to search across the country for gifted students, create a nationwide educational system through the National School of Ballet, develop unique choreographic works while enhancing its traditional repertory. The National Ballet of Cuba quickly became a cultural ambassador for the revolution, the dancers occasionally performing in military uniforms to show their support for the new regime. Castro's continued backing of the arts, including ballet, reflected the deep importance of dance in Cuban society. His commitment laid the foundation for the ballet company to produce some of the world's finest dancers. Additionally, the Cuban National Contemporary Dance Company, also established with government support during the same period, is regarded as one of the best contemporary dance companies in the world today. Middle Eastern ballet influence. It may surprise you to learn that ballet has also had a significant presence in the Middle East, and this is largely due to the same woman known as the godmother of English and Irish ballet, Dame Ninette de Valois. A visionary, de Valois knew how to develop the technique, glamour, and the repertoire of a world-class ballet company. While she achieved this on a grand scale in England, where she was the founder of what is now the Royal Ballet, her influence also extended to Ireland, Canada, and perhaps most interestingly, to Turkey and Iran. In 1931, de Valois founded the Vic Wells Ballet, initially performing at the Old Vic and Sadler's Wells Theatre in London. The company quickly grew in stature and reputation throughout the following decades. And in 1956, the company was granted a royal charter by Queen Elizabeth II, officially becoming the Royal Ballet. This recognition cemented its status as Britain's premier ballet company and marked the beginning of its far-reaching global influence. Under de Valois' leadership, the Royal Ballet nurtured world-class talents, including Margot Fonteyn and Rudolf Nureyev and their partnership after he defected. This partnership became legendary, playing a pivotal role in popularizing ballet on an international scale and adding this element of glamour that elevated the art form's profile worldwide. Now let's back up a little to the Turkish Revolution, during which Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's reforms transformed Turkey from the remnants of the Ottoman Empire into a modern, secular nation-state. This process began with the Turkish War of Independence, which was 1919 to 1922, which expelled foreign occupying forces. On October 29, 1923, the Republic of Turkey was officially proclaimed, with Ataturk serving as its first president. Ataturk then initiated a series of sweeping reforms known as the Ataturk's reforms, or Kemalist reforms, aimed at modernizing and secularizing the country. Some of these reforms were political reforms. They abolished the Sultanate and Caliphate, establishing a republican system. Legal reforms. They replaced Islamic law with secular civil, penal, and commercial codes modeled on European systems. Social reforms. They emancipated women, granting them full rights and abolishing polygamy. Educational reforms. Unified the education system, improving literacy rates, and they, interestingly, replaced the Arabic script with a Latin-based Turkish alphabet. Cultural reforms, introduced Western-style dress, adopted the Gregorian calendar, and implemented the use of surnames. Economic reforms, pursued state-led industrialization to modernize the economy. These reforms were implemented quickly and at times forcefully, facing some resistance. Nevertheless, they successfully transformed Turkey into a more Western-oriented secular state, setting the country on a path of modernization that continued after Ataturk's death in 1938. In 1947, Dame Ninette de Valois was invited by the Turkish government to establish Turkey's first ballet school in Istanbul, laying the groundwork for what would become the Turkish State Ballet. Following the founding of the Turkish Republic, there was a strong drive to modernize the country, and establishing a ballet company was part of this broader effort to develop cultural institutions and promote the arts. And while Turkey's artistic history was rich, especially in this region formerly known as Constantinople, the creation of a national ballet program was a clear statement of Turkey's alignment with Western values and its desire to engage in cultural diplomacy. The system established remains in place in Turkey today. Although less widely known internationally, the country continues to produce some of the world's most exquisite dancers. Ballet in Iran. While Dame Ninette de Valois did not directly establish Iran's national ballet company, she played a crucial advisory role in its development. In 1958, she visited Tehran at the invitation of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi to assess the newly formed National Ballet Academy of Iran. Following her visit, she sent several British ballet experts to Tehran to teach and stage productions, significantly aiding the development of the Iranian National Ballet Company. The company became the most renowned dance institution in the Middle East during its 21-year existence, from 1958 to 1979. The origins of ballet in Iran trace back to the 1920s, when a Russian immigrant, Madame Corneli, who had fled the Bolshevik Revolution, introduced ballet to Tehran. The official Iranian National Ballet was formed in the 1950s as part of the country's larger cultural modernization and, frankly, Westernization initiatives. However, the company's existence was abruptly cut short by the Islamic Revolution of 1979. After the revolution, the ballet company was dissolved and dancers were given an ultimatum: leave the country to continue their careers or stay and abandon ballet. Many chose exile, while others transitioned into acting or theater. Since the dissolution of the Iranian National Ballet, ballet has not legally returned to the country. The company's untimely end and the subsequent ban on ballet in Iran have inspired artistic projects such as The White Feather. a ballet production that pays tribute to the history of Iran's national ballet and its premature final curtain. And if you would like to hear an interview with the choreographer and the producer, the co-choreographer and co-producer of The White Feather, Tara Ghassemieh, you can hear a full interview and story of her work and the story of the Iranian National Ballet on YouTube at The Dance Lens. And this concludes part one of our dance and politics. Series. Was there anything here that surprised you? Come on over to Substack and leave a comment where all the best conversations are starting to happen. Next week, for part two, we'll cover the civil rights movement to the tango and see how dance plays a powerful role in the identity of a nation and individual and cultural movements. And if you like this, make sure you subscribe to the podcast or to the channel wherever you're listening. And if you want even more great dance and arts content, make sure you follow me on my free Substack at The Dance Lens, where all the news comes out first. Thanks for listening. I'm Cynthia Dragoni, The Dance Lens.